areas within the medial parietal area that have been demonstrated to activate in these various theory of mind tasks. And as noted in Buckner and Carroll's 2006 review, those areas of activation are remarkably similar to those that occur when someone is involved in a task requiring remembering of experience, in addition to areas within the medial temporal lobe, or projecting into the future, prospection. And they term this a medial temporal lobe network, which interestingly, turns out to be the same areas that demonstrate activation in situations where one subtracts a variety of task-related blood oxygen level responses from the individual at rest, in order to ask the question not what is correlating with one particular task, contrasting it with some other task, but what happens when you contrast rest with any other kind of task performance. And what seems to be left over at rest is activation within these same areas. So what's going on there? It's been called the default mode. Well, one speculation is that it represents the activation or computation of self. What I remember of the past, what I project of myself into the future. So kind of computing of me at rest. This has some relevance for contemplative perspectives about compassion, in that it is often commented that self-focus is an important aspect of conceptual proliferation, or what often is called monkey mind. And beginning meditators often experience their efforts at sitting meditation to be very difficult, because every time trying to gently bring the attention back to the breath, off things are going into memory, into thinking about the future, as if a monkey jumping from branch to branch. And as Zen teacher Bernie Glassman states, the approach in Zen practice, as well as in many other Buddhist practices, based on starting out without concepts or ideas, bearing witness. That's the first stage in empathic appreciation of someone else and compassionate action. So what's the evidence that there is some kind of alteration in that computing of self, or this monkey mind as contemplative practitioners would describe it? Giuseppe Pagnoni and colleagues now in Italy compared participants who had 3 or more years of daily Zen meditation practice, Zazen, to meditation-naive individuals, had them all doing simple breath attention meditation. Important in this kind of design to have people doing the same thing with their breath, because breath has an effect upon the kind of resultant blood oxygen level dependent responses. And while people within the scanner, they were seeing words and non-words being sequentially presented to them. In contrasting the word to the non-word condition, words activated a number of different areas. Importantly, some of those same areas we were talking about as being part of this default mode network. And Pagnoni and colleagues interpreted this as consistent with this kind of mental proliferation. The word generates associations, memories from my own past, associations having to do with things in the future. Interestingly, with the comparison of the meditators and the meditation-naive individuals, Zen meditators showed faster return to baseline when they looked at the time course of the blood oxygen level response in these various default mode areas. Areas that, again, appear to be associated with conceptual thought and with this computation of a sense of self. So the possibility that what this reflects is similar to what's described phenomenologically by meditators, a kind of letting go of the grasping onto experience. Thoughts, images, feelings come into awareness, one acknowledges them, lets them go, doesn't invite them into tea. Now, there's a linkage here between what happens in this kind of more attentionally focused practice and what goes on, at least over time, in emotion responses. Contemplative traditions endeavor to develop wisdom and compassion. The wisdom element has more to do with attentional stability, with, quote, seeing clearly. The compassionate element has to do with how one responds to other individuals, especially others who are suffering. George Dreyfus, a Buddhist scholar and also a former monk of many years, comments that beginning bodhisattvas, that is, people who practice in this tradition, often are described as being overwhelmed by compassion. But when they progress, their compassion seems to change. Less clearly emotional in what he says is the usual sense of the word, being more described as equanimous.
Pardon, what's that word?
Equanimous. Equanimity.
Oh, right.
Kind of a balancing,
Right.
and not being overwhelmed by the experience. So a question within my own lab related to this was whether experienced meditators would respond differently to emotional stimuli and or regulate their emotion differently than non-meditators. Is there some evidence that there is some difference that accrues, especially over many years of practice? So with my then graduate student Liz Nielsen, we completed a study that we published back in 2006 with the following design. We had a group of non-meditators and a group of long-term meditators, 10 or more years of experience. We showed them either pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant images. I'll give you examples in just a moment. Did those sequentially. And we did so with the stimuli either being masked or non-masked. So within the non-masked condition, standard kind of presentation, 4 seconds of a fixation cross, 3 seconds of exposure here to a negative image, a 4-second pause, and then a response indicating the nature of their emotional experience on valence and arousal dimensions. So here from, it's hard to see from the back, pleasant to unpleasant, very aroused to very quiescent. The mask condition, same 4-second fixation point, but then 45 milliseconds of a mask, 45 milliseconds of the emotionally salient face here, a pleasant image, and then the rest of that 3-second interval with another mask. The mask's composed of Photoshop cut up emotional images on which we worked for a long period of time to make sure that these images themselves did not elicit any particular emotional response, that the contrast and color effectively masked the images. Sometimes very difficult to do whenever there are eyes in an image. That's a very salient aspect of a visual stimulus, and so one has to be really careful. When we asked people about whether they could see the hidden picture, very, very few of them, only 2 or 3, as I remember, were able to say they saw anything, and in each of those instances they were wrong in their guess about what that might have been. But the same kind of response.